We're live. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us, Kentucky Equine Research and Barastoc, tonight on our webinar where we're going to talk through yearling prep and nutrition. We are very fortunate to have Kentucky Equine Research and Barastoc join us as sponsors of Thoroughbred Breeders Victoria, which is quite exciting for us. And we are rolling out the first of a few of these webinars over the next few months on various topics. And the first topic, I guess very timely as we are very close to the sales season, is yearling prep and nutrition. So tonight I am joined by Dr. Peter Huntington, so I'll get you to give us a wave, Peter. Steve Irwin, he's going to give us a wave to the screen, and Andrew Sofa of Barastoc. My name is Charmaine Bukovec and I am the Executive Officer of Thoroughbred Breeders Victoria. Thank you all for joining us for the next hour and a half, whether it be on Zoom. So those of you who are on Zoom and do have the link, obviously we will be able to answer your questions. That's the purpose of registering. And then those on Facebook who may be watching on Facebook Live as well. So thank you for joining us. I hope you get comfortable for the next hour and a half. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel down the bottom as we go, because if it's relevant to the conversation, we might be able to answer one or two, and then we will do question time at the end. So over the next period of time, Dr. Peter Huntington is going to begin, then we'll be followed by Steve, and then Andrew will take us home at the end of the segment with some questions and answers. Before we jump in, just a bit of background. Kentucky Equine Research, we're very excited to partner with KER. They are, the leading, in my opinion, leading feed company and nutrition company when it comes to obviously, making sure they produce ideal equine athletes. So for those who, most of us would know the brand and know a bit about what KER do, but just by a bit of background, KER is an international equine nutrition, research and consultation company serving horse owners and the feed industry. So the company's goals are to advance the industry's knowledge of equine nutrition and exercise physiology, apply that knowledge to produce healthier, more athletic horses, and support the nutritional care of all horses throughout their life. Dr. Joe Pagan formed KER in 1988 to be an international research consulting and product development firm dealing in the areas of equine nutrition and sports medicine. KER served as equine nutrition consultants for the last 6 Olympic Games and World Games, which is absolutely phenomenal. KER has 2 research facilities and they serve as a consultant to feed manufacturers. Their nutritionists work with mill owners and managers on 6 continents to formulate top quality feeds that complement typical local forages. Our first speaker, and I'll introduce them to you as we go, is Dr. Peter Huntington, the Director of Nutrition at KER. So Dr. Peter received a veterinary degree from the University of Melbourne in 1981 and then worked in equine practice in Berwick, Victoria. He joined the Department of Agriculture in Victoria as a horse specialist veterinary officer. While with the Department of Agriculture, he conducted research investigation into the nutrition of horses. Dr. Huntington is an external lecturer and examiner at the University of Melbourne Veterinary Science Program and holds numerous other appointments in the horse industry. He's a past president and editor of the Australian Equine Veterinary Association and has been a trustee of the Australian Horse Industry Council for a number of years. In 1993, that's a bit before, a few years into your university degree there, he joined RPAN as a Director of Equine Nutrition to spearhead their horse nutrition division. This commenced a relationship with KER, who provided consultancy services to RPAN. In 1999, KER established an Australasian operation with Dr. Huntington as Director of Equine Nutrition. Dr. Huntington travels widely to consult with horse owners and managers on equine nutrition and to lecture on the subject. He's the author of the popular book Horse Sense, The Guide to Horse Care in Australia and New Zealand. The second edition was published in 2005, and is a respected author of many articles and papers on a variety of topics relating to equine nutrition. Dr. Huntington, I'll let you take the floor. I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself there. There we go.
Well, there we go, rather than everybody having to do a bit of lip reading. So thanks very much for that introduction, Kentucky Equine Research. We are excited to be a supporter of, a sponsor of Thoroughbred Breeders Victoria, along with Barastoc. And it's an exciting time of the year in the middle of the breeding season, and with the sort of yearling prep upon us, particularly for the Magic Millions. So it's timely, and it won't be long before Melbourne horses are coming in. So I want to talk about feeding and preparing the sales horse, with a particular emphasis on the feeding, because often you do these talks, and I'll try and cover a bit of the management as well, but we're really lucky in having an absolute expert, Steve Irwin, to follow me, who can talk a lot more about the management side and exercise than I can, or with a lot more authority. So we will get going. Here we go. So sale preparation is a combination of things. And so what we've got is a combination of balanced nutrition. We've invariably got weight gain, but that's very much dependent upon individual needs. And you need specific exercise programs, again, depending upon individual needs, with this combination, great health management, daily grooming to make them look shiny and gleam in the sale ring, and terrific attention to detail. So it's a real combination of skills, but it's the one time that young horses can be fed and managed individually, and I think it's a key thing that you need to take advantage of when you're doing it. Just a couple of slides about some differences in the way horses are presented for sale in different countries that I think is quite interesting. And Australasian horses tend to be heavier than the rest of the world at most ages, foals, except perhaps at birth, but for most of their life they're heavier, and they're certainly heavier when they go into the yearling sale ring. The market demands them heavier, more muscle genetically. They have more muscle often, and the market demands that they go in carrying more condition than you might see in other countries, although perhaps not as much condition as number 4 is carrying there. Contrast, English horses are much more prepared in a more athletic fashion. They've got a longer sale prep period, and do lots and lots of walking, so the grooms wear out their shoes during that sale prep. And they're often somewhat a bit shorter and lighter than American or Australian yearlings. Those sold in Kentucky are sort of, somewhere in between. Their sale prep can run for up to 5 months, but they're often pretty fit and ready to run. And I think, interestingly, one of the, having Steve talking about sale prep and a number of preps he's done at Arrowfield, that's one of the farms where the horses go to the sales fitter than many others, and I think that's a great advantage. Size does matter at the sales, and this is some recent data we've collected from Kentucky, looking at the median sale price over, there was 314 yearlings off 6 farms, and it was a study we were doing about the interactions between growth and size and survey x-rays, sales and racing. And this is weight quartile. So the first quartile is the smallest 25, the lightest 25%, and the fourth is the heaviest. And you can see, well, the heavier they were, the more money they made. And interestingly, the taller they were, the more money they made. That's Kentucky. In Australia, that fourth quartile is certainly the top end of it. It's starting to struggle because people don't want to buy really big horses. But that's the pattern over there. You can't take them in. The heavier they are and the taller they are, the more money you make. Study we did on body condition score at Keeneland a number of years ago. Clarissa Brown-Douglas, one of our nutritionists here, was involved in that, along with Steve Cadell from Hallway Feeds. And this is the American yearlings, American body condition score sale. So 70% of the yearlings sold were body condition score of 6 to 6.5, 30% a little bit less. But the ones that were passed in tend to be more likely to be in the lighter end of the scale. So half the passed in yearlings had a body condition score of 5.5, whereas only 30% of the sold yearlings. So suggesting that 6 is the sort of ideal body condition score. What about the interrelationship between yearling size and racing performance? We've done a couple of those. Clarissa did this great look at it back in 2006 and got racing records and growth data from 4,000 horses, and found that tall and moderately heavy growing horses were more likely to be successful athletes. We've again gathered some recent data about that, and that's here shown on the right hand side, and this is this study we've done in Kentucky, and we're following up with more work in Australia. And there we can see that you know, small not necessarily bad. So this second quartile here group, so that's between the 25 and the 50th percentile, and this is as yearlings, they had more winners than in the other categories and more stakes winners. So you know, worth bearing in mind. Smaller horses probably get to run earlier, more career starts, and perhaps sounder horses, but really small yearlings, very few stakes winners. So you've got to stay away from that. The brown is weight, the orange is height. So ideally, the really small horse, certainly they struggle to sell too, and as elite performers, they're definitely not as good. But there are always exceptions to those rules. What about sale price and career earnings in each yearling quartile? This was the 2006 study, and obviously, as the as the yearling weight quartiles went up, so did the sales price. That's the bar graph. The line graph is the career earnings, and that tended to peak in this third quartile there. But we often had the champions and the really elite performers over here in the fourth quartile. When we looked at percent stakes winners, again, the peak here was probably in the second quartile. And this is an elite bunch of horses because, you know, in these second, third and fourth ones, they were 8% stakes winners, but much lower stakes winning percentage in amongst the short guys. So some of those things you can change during prep, some you can't. Height you got very little influence on in preparation, but you can certainly change the weight and the muscle and the fat cover. Too big or growing too quickly, certainly too tall gets marked down in Australia. And if they're too big as foals or they grow too quickly, you've got an increased risk of developmental orthopedic disease. Too tall, too long necked, an increased risk of them being aurora and having problems with scope. So it's finding a happy medium, and that optimum size might be in the second or third quartile. So getting on to yearling prep program, there's a lot of work involved, and it certainly should improve the value of any animal, but it won't overcome you know, pedigree page weaknesses if there's no black type, the thing that's too small, or conformation where you've got knees going in all different directions, or towing in, etc. And I suppose this, you know, a rat is still going to be a rat at the end of the sale prep program, unfortunately. So it can disguise some things, but it won't overcome a lot of inherent weaknesses. So this sort of thing starts, you've got to start thinking about it before the prep starts. And so you're wanting to do some things like, you know, adjusting the horse to the feed that's going to be used in the prep, ideally before the prep starts, keeping the feet in good shape. You can't do much with hooves and feet if they're a real mess by the time the horse comes in. You know, if the yearling's tails have been chewed through winter, you're going to have a very different looking horse. So getting your crib box on months before yearling prep is a good idea. I think adding a bit of fat for coat conditioning about a month before they come in is a good idea, and that can help you get the coat shine with less supplementation and less hard work during the actual yearling prep program. In fact, one of the sort of times where you might think of almost, you know, not quite a prep, but a mini prep is the sales inspection time. Often comes at the end of winter, so it's difficult to get the horse with a good coat. But if you've got a horse that's, you know, you're trying to get into a good sale, then getting them looking a bit shinier, getting that winter coat to disappear a bit, and so increasing the energy and adding some fat in diets for a few weeks beforehand can often help you get the horse into the right sale. And as you've all know, there's massive changes in horses. It's tough for the sales companies because these are babies then, they're not even yearlings, and they're trying to pick which ones get into the sale, and that can be a real challenge because later maturing types are going to look very different come January, February, March or April than they do in July or August. But there's some tricks you can do there. You want to get them in the right condition before the prep. Some horses have had confinement for long periods relating to survey x-rays, so they lose muscle. They're often, you're depriving them, you're feeding them an energy deficient diet at that time. You're wanting them to lose weight, grow slower, and so you've got to get those looking right by the time they come in. Spring grass, horses can do really well during spring grass. Fillies particularly can get very fat in spring, and this data down the bottom is showing average daily gains of colts versus fillies in Kentucky, and at different ages. And the red's the fillies, and you can see during springtime when they were sort of 14, 15 months old, they had a much higher average daily gain and a higher body condition score than the colts. So I think feeding fillies and colts differently during spring is something that's going to be useful, so that you don't end up with all these fat fillies coming in that you can't feed at all, and you've got to work really hard to get the weight off them. So what are the challenges of sale prep? You've got a number of them there. You've got a big change from the paddock in terms of their diet and in terms of exercise. You're wanting to put them in this positive energy balance so that they stack weight on, they put the weight on, but behavior can be a challenge when they're in a positive energy balance. And it's important to match your feed and work. You want to build muscle, but sometimes you've got to build fat cover as well, because the market demands you can't sell horses with too many ribs showing, and at the same time get the horse fit for parades. If it's going to be a popular horse at the sales, they've got to be really fit because they're doing a lot of steps each day. But ideally you want them peaking at the right time. Now, is the right time during inspections before the sale on the farm? Is the right time videoing when they're videoed, or is the right time at the sales? I guess that's a combination of all of them. So it's challenging, and it needs to be done individually. A number of sort of health issues or feeding related issues that you can have. Gastric ulcers, hindgut acidosis, gut disturbances are quite common, relating to the change in diet and the change in environment. You get these combinations of the too fat or too thin yearling, and how you handle those during the prep are really important to the success of the program. Behavior issues. One of the real challenges is when they start to grow. If they start to grow during prep, they're more likely to get fasciitis, particularly if they're offset, and then you often can't work them as much. So that's a real challenge. So you want to sort of keep them growing. You don't want to have a setback before you bring them in, because then otherwise, you give them extra feed, they'll grow rapidly at that time, and that's difficult to manage if they're doing that. Now, what happens with the first week? They're adapting to the stable, big change of diet. If you pour all the grain into them that you want to from the end, then you'll increase the risk of gastric ulcers and certainly hindgut disturbances. So often horses will lose weight. If you weigh them when they come in and you weigh them after the first week, sometimes they've lost weight, but that doesn't really matter because you can put it on later. Often that's just gut fill, water in their gut. But I think go steadily with grain in the first week. Let them adapt. We talk about 7 days or so to adapt to a big change in diet, and this is certainly a big change in diet. So one of the things you're trying to do early on is avoiding gut issues. So that's adequate forage. Now, the pasture, if there's pasture in yards and they get out in yards, that's great, but they're out there for a much shorter period of time in general, and sometimes they're not there at all than they would be if they're out in the paddock. So ad lib hay can be really useful at this time, rather than just the sort of 2 biscuits of hay a day. Chaff or some haylage in the feed bin to slow down the grain intake can also help. Get meal sizes small. If you are feeding a large amount of grain to them or concentrates, then, ideally split into 3 rather than just the 2 feeds that we tend to follow. Lower starch feeds are also, and heat processed grains are important in avoiding gut issues. So lower starch feeds with more fat and digestible fiber keeps the energy content up, but you don't require as much starch as you would get from a big heavy oat or barley or corn-based feed. Gastric ulcers are certainly a challenge during yearling prep, and because of the dietary change and the exercise that they're getting, some people use omeprazole courses on horses that are not eating well. Some use them on every horse. Lucerne hay, particularly lucerne hay before work, is a really useful gut buffer. And so this is one of the great benefits of lucerne, reducing buffering acid, stopping the gut content splashing around. I think that's a useful thing, hay or chaff there. Omega-6 fatty acids. We tend to talk about omega-3 fatty acids having a great deal of benefits for anti-inflammatory benefits for the horse, but omega-6 fatty acids can reduce acid output. And this is a study that was done in Florida years ago. On the right-hand side, ponies that were fed corn oil here on the dotted line had lower acid output than those on the control diet. So things with corn oil or rice bran oil or rice bran, so this has obviously got rice bran oil in it, sunnies, good sources of omega-6 fatty acids. There's some coating agents around, or you can get gastric buffers. You can get a number of buffers around that can prove useful in terms of mopping up acid and reducing the risk. Here's an endoscopic picture of a horse on a treadmill with no feed there on the left, just walking, and that's gastric contents. And this is what's happening when we've got feed in it. So you can see here the feed, this is tilted on its side, but there's all the feed lying on the gastric contents. That's lucerne in this instance, and that's stopping the splashing that you might get when a horse is trotting or going any faster than a walk. Hindgut issues are a common thing in yearlings. They may be represented by loose manure. They may also be represented by behaviour changes. And one of the research studies we've done that's been a really successful one and benefit for many horses over the years was this study looking at the development of Equisure, where we fed them a high grain diet, and the control horses in this high grain diet got a dramatic reduction in fecal pH, representing what's happening in the large intestine, and the horses on the supplement tend to stay at a very stable level, and so that was a real benefit. So if you do have horses with hindgut disturbances, then that's one good consideration as a supplement. So we want balanced nutrition at this time, and there are several key nutrients. Energy is obviously a really important one, particularly if we're wanting weight gain. Fibre is very important, gut health, and then we have to consider, protein, minerals, and vitamins. So starting with forage, as we always do, time in the paddock's obviously going to vary from, sometimes people will put horses out all day, or some put them out overnight, but many times they're out just for an hour or two, and some not at all. So that's going to change. You need to replace that the pasture with other forages. So hay, ideally ad lib, but people get worried, or hay bellies become an issue, certainly close to the sale. Chaff has some advantages, fills the feed bin, slows down grain intake. And it's a low energy sort of source in the feed bin if the horse is overweight. But you can be a bit fooled by the amount of weight you're giving a horse, and a big bucket of lucerne chaff's only got about the same content as a biscuit of hay. So in terms of getting forage into the horse, not so useful. Haylage is a recent additive that many people have found to be useful during yearling prep, because it's dust-free and quite palatable. So there's some New Zealand-based haylages. Super fibres are great additions to prep diets, yearling prep diets. These are fibre sources that are far more digestible than your average fibre source like hay. And beet pulp and soybean hulls are the most famous of those, but there are some other ones, almond hulls, etc. and lupin hulls. And even the fibre in rice bran is pretty digestible too. It's more digestible than other fibre sources. So they're certainly present in some of the prepared feeds that we've formulated and are used with Yearling Prep. And so they've got a good super fibre representation, so you get more energy from fat and fibre. But you're getting more energy from fibre, which enables you to have less reliance upon starch. So the amount of energy you feed, the calories are going to come from carbohydrates, fat and fibre principally, and that'll determine body condition. Won't determine the height of the horse. It'll certainly influence the top line, will influence the hair coat. If you've got a horse that's on an energy deficient diet, then one of the first things you see is a change. They grow more hair, and will certainly influence behaviour, particularly if it's a starch-based energy. So that needs to be a consideration in your makeup of the diet. So your energy sources, as I say, I've mentioned forages, grains. It can be oats, barley, corn, lupins, sunflower seeds. We've got most of those in there, except for oats in that particular feed. Could be premix feeds, and a variety of fat sources are going to be useful for adding extra energy. The grains should be processed except oats. There's no need. You might get, if horses have poor teeth, then you may get a benefit from processing oats, but all yearlings should have their teeth done before they come in, so they can chew the feed properly. Sometimes the processing, they have a hard shell like a lupin, so you need to crack it to allow digestibility. But with things like corn or barley, you need steam processing, steam flaking or micronizing to improve the digestibility and gelatinizing the starch. And that's a really important way of reducing gastrointestinal problems such as colic or hindgut acidosis. Fat-based energy is terrific for yearling prep. It's very concentrated. So a cup of oil's got the same amount of energy as, say, 3/4 of a dipper of oats. So vegetable oil is a variety of ways of doing it. You can use oils, you can use linseed, you can use sunflower seeds or rice bran. Stabilised rice bran is also a very useful fat supplement. Fat-based feeds slow down stomach emptying, lower glycemic response. That's good. Can have an impact on behaviour. It's calm energy. Sometimes they provide omega-3 fatty acids, and they can have anti-inflammatory benefits. Great for the coat as well as adding body condition. We found Equijel to be a fantastic supplement to yearling prep and show preparation over many years, 20-odd years. It's a low starch feed. It's got the fibre in it is actually in the super fibre category, and it's got about 50% more energy than oats. So you just don't have to fill the feed bin up as much to get the same energy into a horse. We've put some gastric buffers in, this KER BMC, so it's good for the ulcers and for the hindgut, and it's also pretty easy to feed. Less so some real benefits from that in a yearling prep program. So when you choose, one of the first considerations might be, do you want oats in the feed? Are you going to add them on top from your own? Or are you going to, that may depend upon the individual horse or in terms of feeds. So there are many, I will go that way. Get my slideshow there. Righto, sorry about that short break. Many different combinations you can use. You can use home mixed grains, and there's no one great way of feeding horses. There's many different ways that can work, but it's getting that individual attention right about the types of feed, the calorie intake, and matching that with the work that's important during yearling prep. So home mixed grains, you can use pelleted feeds like Breed and Grow. Extruded feeds are popular in some quarters, although I tend to think they don't always have as many advantages as some other forms. Sweet feeds are common during yearling prep, and that can help the horse adapt to the sort of feeds they might be fed during racing, so a sweet feed like Prepare. Or you can use a concentrate, and sometimes people are going to use combinations. So one of the big decisions you have to make all the way through the prep is, what weight gains do you want? So obviously the horse on the left needs some weight gain. So you want to be pouring the calories into this horse, and maybe you need to be working it. Maybe it does need plenty of work. Maybe it doesn't need as much. Whereas the horse on the right, which is close to sale, probably doesn't need a lot of weight gain. And so there you might be looking at increasing the work and reducing the amount going into the feed bin. So that's one of the decisions you have to make. If you've got scales and can weigh horses, you're in better shape to make those decisions. And I think weighing them weekly during prep and looking at the average daily gain. So the green figure here is the reference average daily gain. And, this horse supposedly came in and then supposedly did, 3 kilos a day. And you'd get a little bit worried about that, 3 kilos a day. It's stacked on 20 kilos in the week. But then things steadied down, and then we had another big week here, 1.5 kilos a day. So you certainly might review the feeding program if you had horses doing 3 kilos a day. What about protein and amino acids? Are these important? And they are. Their protein and amino acids are vital for growth and milk production. These are still growing horses. They're also required for muscle development, bone. But the amounts we feed horses during yearling prep and the amount of lucerne that's fed and the protein content of the feeds that used mean we're very unlikely to see any deficiencies. So extra protein sources on their own may not be needed if the diet is well balanced and we've got enough protein coming in the feeds. When you look at the protein needs of the total diet, you've got yearlings coming in at 12-13%. That's their total dietary needs. If you've got something like lucerne at 16% protein and you've got prepare at 15%, you can see that if they were the two ingredients, then you'd have a diet with with more than enough protein. Command at 13%, breed and grow at 17%. You've got protein well covered. What about minerals and vitamins? How important they are? Now, if you're using a good quality feed, they'll be in there at the right amounts related to the intakes. They're certainly essential for proper skeletal growth and bone development. And there's a number of them there: calcium, phosphorus, trace minerals, vitamin A, D, K, etc. They're important. And we actually put those to use recently in developing a new supplement. And this on the right-hand side, triactin, which is, and also the same ingredients have been included in some feeds like low GI, where we found we could get improvements in dorsal cortical bone density. We're taking x-rays of the cannon bone, and the blue are the control horses that were fed a normally balanced diet, and the red were the treated horses. These were young race horses, but I think prep is a time when bones are under stress because there's a lot of weight gain, but there's also a change in the exercise, and this is, I think, a time when this might be useful as an additive. Immune function, vitamin, antioxidants and zinc are important, and for hoof and coat, you've got biotin, zinc and methionine being particularly important. So combination, skeletal growth and bones, we need balanced mineral nutrition, and we need exercise. Exercise is really important. Bone responds to exercise, but genetics, stresses and trauma are also key factors. And so it's this combination of feeding and exercise and genetics that you're wanting to get right. There's certainly no short-term fixes when they come in. If you get a light-boned filly come in, you're not going to change that during prep, but you may want to think about avoid getting it too heavy and be careful with the work surfaces. And then perhaps review some of the programs, going back even to the pregnant mares to look at what you can do about future crops. If horses, yearlings have fasciitis in the knees, be careful with hard work. Don't work them too hard, because that's likely, they'll get over the fasciitis, but if you work them too hard, it'll be prolonged. And I think, the triactin that I mentioned previously is a really useful supplement during prep to look after their bones and their gut, and also after survey x-rays with horses that have issues. They're often confined, and that confinement means that they don't get the exercise to stimulate bone development. What about vitamins and minerals? Should be in the feed if they're fed at the right rate, so you shouldn't need to be adding extra. In fact, most times yearling prep diets are over-fortified. But if you've got something on no grain for whatever reason, then a balance of pellet or a low intake concentrate can be useful. Salt's obviously important. in all horses, and depending on the sweat losses, electrolytes are going to be important. So electrolytes are something that, I don't think we need to worry about with horses sold in Melbourne, for example, in June, but you certainly do need to worry about with the Magic Millions sales. And and sales in Sydney where it's hotter and more humid. So you need to worry less at Easter than you do at say Magic Millions. So salt and electrolytes, all horses should have a salt block. Feeds have some added salt, but the electrolyte needs are going to vary according to the sweat loss, and that'll depend on the time of year and how hard you work them. Coat. It's a really key thing to get a yearling right. People put a lot of effort into grooming, into rugging, into lights. Getting the rugging right is really important. But there's a few things you can do nutritionally that can help you there. Keeping the horse in a positive energy balance, getting enough fat in the diet is important. If you've got a bleach coat and you want to put some colour back into it, some richness, then organic trace minerals are going to be useful. And biotin, zinc and methionine from a hoof supplement like BioBloom can really help hoof growth, but also mane and tail, and help shift the old hair so you get this new shiny coat. You shift your winter coat with that. Exercise is really important. And I won't talk much about that because we've got an expert following me. So, you can't just feed them. They've got to look like athletes. And the exercise has got a number of benefits. And in fact, it can increase appetite. It's important to make them fit. It will calm horses down. So you can't just feed yearlings. You've got to exercise them appropriately. Needs to be adjusted to the individual and start off short duration, low intensity. And if horses are showing negative signs such as fasciitis or effusion in their joints, or they're losing weight, then you've got to adjust it. A whole variety of exercises that are used, and different people have got different things that they think are important. Absolutely important that you teach the horse how to hand walk, because they've got to walk when they're at the sales to parade. So that's importance number one. And then you've got a variety of other things that can be an important part of their program. And usually it's a combination of all of them, or not all of them, but several forms of exercise that are important. Some horses need to go on the walker twice a day to build muscle. Going on the walker with, and get, as long as the walker is safe and it's got a good surface, then they can spend plenty of time in the day on the walker, not just go on it when you're doing the box. Now, what about some of the problems that you're going to get? What are the things we get in yearlings problem solving that we got to look at? We've got the one that won't eat. That can be a challenge. Behaviour issues, I've spoken of some of the things you can do with behaviour. Too short, it's going to be very hard to fix that. But sometimes exercise makes them grow. And one of the challenges is when they grow rapidly in height, actually, during prep. You're trying to avoid that because that predisposes them to fasciitis. Having no neck or top line, well, that can be partly addressed with feed, with calories, with things like Equidul, partly with exercise. And exercising them, either walking them on with a roller can really help there. The cresty one, where you've got to exercise them and cut back on the calories to do that, but then often they drop the weight elsewhere. Hay belly, I'll come to in a minute, and the poor coat we've spoken of. So behaviour, what are we doing there? Well, we're looking at the amount of grain we're feeding. That's a key influence there, and maybe looking at more forage and fat as energy sources. If they're feeding oats, we'll perhaps back the oats off and go to barley, steam flake barley as an ingredient. Give them more work, more time out, look at the gut. And then there are a variety of calming supplements that people use. Now, the hay belly is mainly a concern at the sale, and you've got to distinguish whether it's gut fill or fat when you're looking at the horse. So you really can only do that by getting up close and running your hand along and saying, oh, I thought it was fat, but I can actually see and feel the ribs, so it must be a hay belly. Oftentimes work's the thing that gets rid of that, using better quality forages and restricting hay at the sale. Now, in the last week, you've got to taper the work somewhat, generally speaking. So if you do that and you're happy with the condition, you cut back the grain. You might adapt them to the feed that they're going to be fed at the sale, because often people change the feeds, they make it more simple at the sale, and you're going to be avoiding a hay belly. and making sure you've got that coat looking right. The last bits of attention to detail is what you need to do there. At the sales, you want horses that are calm, but they need energy to parade if they're being out 25 times a day. They've got to be alert. They've got to. So it's a balancing act depending on the individual horse and on the number of times they're going to be out. Many people cut the grain back, but if they're not out much, you've got to avoid them getting bored. Small hole hay nets can be really good there. You can give them plenty of hay, they can get to eat all day, but when they're in the box, but they're not actually eating massive amounts of hay. So, in summary, you get rewards for hard work. You know, the work you put in, you'll get the rewards at the other end. But a well-done prep won't fix all problems. Balanced nutrition is important, but it's the time to be individual, and it's the time to vary that to the individual. Getting the exercise and matching the exercise and the work is really important. And remember, you are looking to rear an athlete, like Miss Finland there on the right-hand side. And that's her growth record, actually. So she was always a big young horse. The green's weight, and the orange is height, and she was a very strong yearling. So. And I think there's sort of, rather than just taking a horse to the sales and going, well, here is this, you know, if you've got some growth records, you show a bit of the history of the horse. You show where it was and where it's come from, and that might be something that farms are thinking of doing more. And particularly with you know, sales where more people are bidding online and can't look at the individual horse, that might be something that's worth thinking about. So if you need more information, our website, we've got Equinews, which is a fantastic resource on nutrition and health. We also have advice services, both Barastoc and KER. And I think hopefully I've covered some of the basic things and about the feeding side of things. And Steve can tell you a lot more about the management and the feeding things that he's found being really useful in being an outstandingly successful yearling prepper. So thanks for your attention, and I'll hand back to Charmaine.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was very informative. You have a wealth of knowledge, and I always love listening to you when you speak. Some very valuable insight there. Does anyone at the minute have one or two questions for Peter? We will take them at the end as well, but if someone has a burning question right now, if you want to pop it in the chat box, happy to direct it Peter's way. Does anyone have anything for the minute? Give it a minute, because sometimes it can take a little while for them to come through. Okay, we don't have it at the minute, so we will we'll press on, and we can come back to any questions that people might be formulating as we go. Now, our next speaker is Steve Irwin. Stephen has had 35 years in the thoroughbred industry and 30 years preparing yearlings for sale. He's been the yearling manager for Blandford Park, Yarraman Park, Widden Stud, Arrowfield Stud, and he's had his own farm as well, Riversley Farm, which he's had. As we've discussed, will take us through you know, the more in-depth side of yearling prep and the hands-on side. So I'll share a presentation now, and whenever you're ready, Steve, we'll get you to jump off mute and let you begin.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Steve. I really appreciate your time, and I'm really excited to hear all about you in your presentation.
Pete basically stole everything I was going to say, so I'll try and do my best.
I promise I didn't send the notes.
That's all right. So, righto, let's get into it. So basically, guys, look, this is my own opinion on what's worked for me anyway over the years, and it's taken a long time to sort of really get, basically I call it like a KFC recipe of what really worked for me. And I'd say for probably 10 or 12 years, I've been using mostly KER products. So I've had very good success with the products. and it's not a free promotion for KER. It's just what's worked for me, and I know basically down to the day when I'm prepping yearlings that I can trust the feed and the KER products that I've been using. So yeah, absolutely love them. So next page. Oh, I think she's gone. You there, Charmaine? No. Sorry. Sorry about this, guys.
It's time for you to ad lib a bit. Well, till we get, Charmaine must have lost her internet connection, I'd say. So, you can ad lib and tell us some stories.
Look, yeah, so basically, guys, I was very lucky. I got the chance to work with some fantastic farms like Widden, Yarraman Park, Arrowfield and places like that. And to be able to go and prepare yearlings for those farms is just an honour to actually get to work with such great horse people and horses. So, righto, so we're back on track now. So, look, the main things that I found, the most important things in yearling prep is, without a doubt, the most important thing is feeding. And it just has to be spot on all the time. And that's why always, before prep would start, I'd sit down and talk with Peter and we'd just go through the feed. We'd also look, like, for example, last year, the horses come in off a very, very severe drought. So they were always probably a fraction behind the 8 ball. So it was always a bit of a push when they come into prep. So getting the right feed in the right sort of program was really critical for when those yearlings come in. So basically, you've got the feed, you've got the exercise plan. I don't like to push the yearlings too much earlier on when they come into prep. They go on the walker for more for learning how to do things, to settle down, just for education to start with. So that's the main part of the exercise there. And then as we go on, they start working sort of 6 weeks out from the sale. One of the most important things is the staff and the horse education. And I really find it's great if you can actually, especially with a big farm, you need to get all your staff in before the sales, if you can, before you bring the yearlings in. And there's one thing really about prep that I learnt, and it can be a bit harsh sometimes, is you've got to not feel too much of an issue if you hurt people's feelings. If they're not good enough to handle those horses when they first come in, because the first 2 weeks is very critical. And inexperienced people can come in and they can sort of, in a way, nearly even ruin horses. And it might take 4 or 5 weeks to get them back on track. So it's an important thing to really know what you're doing when those horses come in and have the right people. And you might have, for example, 20 staff on the team, but only 10 might handle those horses for the first 2 weeks, and the other guys just might do boxes, help hose down and things like that. My whole thing is basically working backwards from sale day. And as Peter said, it's about peaking the horses right. It's very hard these days because you have to peak them probably earlier than normal. You've got the pre-parades, you've also got the, with filming now with a lot earlier. So there's a lot, you've probably got to get the horses a little bit more forward than you normally do. But I still always say it's exactly, you've got to have them right on sale day. So, okay, next page. So basically 2 weeks before the yearlings come in, like I said, we go over the feed, go over that with Pete. If the yards are bare, then we know when the horses come in, we have to put some hay out there, and we might even change it up a little bit with a bit of oat and hay and loosen hay. The first week they basically come in is with the feeding. We try and introduce the feed to their old paddock feed for the first week, and just slowly, like Peter said, so we're not busting them with too much grain, because they normally come in, first few days they might guts themselves and then they'll sort of be a little bit unsettled. So you just have to slowly introduce the feed. What I found with also working with a big farm, and you have a lot of people that do the feeds. So at Arrowfield, for example, we had a big mixer, we'd mix all the feed, and basically I had 4 dipper sizes. So it was try to be very foolproof. And then I would go through and score the yearlings on basically what size feed they need to have. So next page. So basically when the yearlings come in, one of the most important things I found that worked for me was I always want to look at the horses the same time every day. So a lot of people might only really study the yearlings once a week, twice a week. But as a yearling manager, I wanted to try and look at those horses a minimum 5 days a week. So I preferred to look at the horses in the afternoon. So basically from 2 o'clock every day, we'd inspect all the horses. And I was very lucky at a place like Arrowfield that I had enough staff and we could do that. So every afternoon from 2 o'clock, we'd bring the horses out. I'd stand the horses side on, observe them, look at everything. We'd watch them walk up and down and then come back, and I'd also stand and look at them again side on. And one way I really got to tell the condition on the horse was running my hands along the side of the ribs. And it's very surprising. And like Peter was saying, horses with hay bellies, people look at them and think they're fat. A lot of time they're actually not fat. So by running your hand over the ribs, you could feel the meat on the bones. And that to me was a very important tool. So, and also looking at the horses from side on, it gives you a very good indication how they're handling prep. Because normally, basically, you've got to me, get a really good imprint in your mind of those horses. And that's why looking at them every day at the same time, it sort of imprints in your brain. And what I would normally find is the easiest way you can tell a horse isn't doing right in prep is they start going upright in the joints. And a lot of the times they might actually go more upright behind than in front. And they actually start even knuckling over. So when the horses are doing that, you know they're growing too quick. And the key thing that I found for settling that down was we'd basically drop most of the grain out of the horses, feed a fair bit more equidual, and we'd box rest them a lot, and then only put them on the walker on a hard surface, walking slowly, and just keep them restricted. And I normally find it nearly take 2 weeks for that to settle down. But to give you an example, you basically watch the horse and they'd pop over on the hind fetlock. So it's something that tells you the horse is doing too well. And if you don't sort of act on it straight away, in 3 or 4 weeks down the track, that horse, you'll really end up in some major issues and may have to withdraw it from the sale if you don't act on it. So next page. So basically, the person in charge of yearlings is the doctor, you're the dietitian, you're the fitness coach, and you're the shrink. And also, so that's why it's critical to get to know every horse. And it's also very important for your staff to know every horse. So in the afternoons, that's where I would have different people help parade the horses. I'd have the assistant yearling managers always watch when we parade the horses as well. And they had to study and learn it. So, because you can't be eyes everywhere. And, you know, it's just, you've got to have all your staff, you've got to put as much effort into your staff as you do the horses. And I think that's critical to get a great team and get great results at sales. Next page. So as I said, the education of the horses and staff is critical. So, and that's where you really have to look at your staff and watch them. So each day when the horses go out, most of the time I'd actually watch all the horses walk in and out, and I'd watch how the staff interact with the horses. And it's just some people and horses don't get on. And I mean, I had yearlings that I just wouldn't get on with. And that may come down to sometimes as well as those people are probably the more advanced horsemen or women, and they have to go in and sort out those yearlings when they're playing up. So a lot of the time that horse might remember that you had to give it a little bit of a tune up. And I had no issue with that. Then afterwards, handing that on to someone else, and then the horse would go fantastic and relax for them. But sometimes you just need that more experienced person to sort that horse out, and then it just helps. And also by doing that, a lot of the younger people and people who aren't as experienced get to see you doing that, and it's your job to teach them as well. So basically you've got to teach those people to be as confident as you can, because you've got to protect and train them to be safe around the horses as well. So the last thing you want is those people getting hurt, and also the horses getting hurt, because you can lose a lot of money if your yearling gets away and injures itself. Next one. So the timeline, so basically in the first week, like we said, we introduce the feed in slowly. So basically by the second week, they're on the full feed. And by that time, that gives me a little bit of an indication of how the horse is coping. And you'll really find that in the sort of second week, some horses are smashing all the feed, happy as Larry, enjoying the prep, and some are very timid. So a lot of the time, the ones that are timid, they're going to be very hard to prep. So you need to really work out the issues with them right at the start. So basically the Timon type of horses I normally find could have something else going on, could even have ulcers going on, things like that. So normally I might wait a little bit further down the track before I start trying to identify if they've got ulcers and things like that. But it may even just be the feed they don't like. So you've got to try and help encourage them to eat the feed. Might have to add different molasses in or apple cider vinegar and things like that. And one of the other things is always get a worm count done and just see where you're at with that. So week 2, right. Righto, so as I said, in week 2, basically, we get to the stage there where we'll start looking at the feeds. We're looking at the horses each day, and that's when I'll start. They'll either be then put on a smaller, medium or large feed. And basically that gives us an indication then of how quickly they're going to start doing. So the ones that are on the big feeds, they're the ones who've been basically got to be trying to push along. And what I normally find is the same thing I said, is by looking at them each day, you can actually start seeing how quickly those horses start doing. So every 3 or 4 days, I would even sometimes readjust the feeds. And by looking at the same time each day, I could evaluate the horse that way. So there's a lot of time as well. We have horses that sift out different powders and things like that. So even though the feed that we would mix up would be dampened down with oil and molasses and water, we would also then have to go and even add a bit more in. And sometimes you'd even find in the morning feed, they would get at about 4:30, and at 7 o'clock, some horses still hadn't cleaned up. So we'd go through and put in a little bit more molasses and water just to get those powders in the feed. And then they would finish that morning feed off. So it's just quite important to do that. If you do drop your feed down, to be a smaller, I would talk with your person like Peter just to say, do we need to add a couple extra things in? So week 3 now, everything's starting to go good. We start normally probably doing a bit of hand walking and doing the education of the horses. So it's quite important to get them in a routine. They'd be going on the walker maybe every second day, those type of things as well, just to start getting used to it. By that time as well, you're going to know if horses are starting to cope in prep. And if some are playing up and not settling down, then you've probably got an indication they're not handling the grain real well, because you're sort of starting to pump the feed in by now. So you've got to look at a couple of different things, whether you give them more time out in the yards, and that does make it hard prepping, because as we know, summer gets hot, the flies are out there, the sun can bleach the coat. So what I would normally do is we'd kick some off on the vitamin B, the Be Quiet, and just see if that would help settle them down, give them a week on that. If it wouldn't, then I would probably change yearlings back to the cool command in their feed and increase the equidual as well. So basically, you need the grain in the horses to build the muscle and the condition. So unless you really have to cut the grain back, I prefer not to, and I prefer to look at different options. Next one. So basically, yeah, so 6 weeks from the sale, we're doing a lot of hand walking. I would go out and hand walk around the yards to try and keep it safe. So if a horse does get away, it's just a lot safer for the handler and the horse. And that time there, you start swapping the staff around and watching them and evaluating how they're going with the horses. And then also a lot of time you have to pick your team. It's going to be your parade team, and you start the need to try and train those people also that haven't done preps on what they've got to do and getting horses ready for the sales, grooming quickly and things like that. But also it's 6 weeks to 8 weeks is when I knew the feed mix that I was using would really start kicking in. And basically, if a yearling wasn't doing by, say, week 8, I'd be very worried. But by week 6, it's normally starting to kick in. They're looking good. And you just start fine-tuning the feed on that horse a little bit. Like I said before, that's when I normally probably would find there'd be some ulcers or issues with the coat that horses aren't doing. That's when we'd go and pull bloods, check for ulcers. If the bloods weren't quite right, we'd put them on hemo build. They may go on ulcer treatment as well. I found Ulcer Guard very good myself. So it was normally, that was about a 6-week period when the horses weren't coping, and you'd find that ulcers would be kicking in. And it's very important to be able to pick that up, because it doesn't matter how much you feed or stuff into the horse. If they've got issues with ulcers, you're not going to get them right. So next one. So basically the last few weeks before the sale, the work's starting to really crank up. And with the horses going on the horse walker, I've always preferred walkers that have sand bases. And I prefer to actually trot the horses. So a lot of people lunge, and that's fine. If you can lunge, that's great. But with the large amount of horses I found with the sand on the walker, it was really good to be able to put them on and give them a trot. So basically, to me, you need to know the distance around your walker. For example, if it's 60 metres around, you've got to think of the work that a racehorse does on a track. You know, they might go out and trot 2 laps and then gallop over 1,200 metres, and that's an old racehorse. So you've got to think of your yearling's joints and legs. So basically, I'll give you an example, with the walker, I'd probably do 10 laps walking, so that's 600 metres. Then I'd do, say, 6 laps trotting at a medium speed, and then the horses that I need to put more condition on are a bit fatter and things like that and needed to do the work. They'd probably do another 4 laps trotting on a higher speed. And it's amazing how they really enjoy going fast on the walker and buck and kicking and things like that. So they'd do that both ways. So in the end, they'd probably do close to 2.5 to 3 kilometres, and that's in about 4 inches of sand. But we'd have the sand wet, so it was a good base, and it's very important. You basically got to be like a track manager to have your walker surface perfect. So we would do 3 different lots of walking. There'd be the light walkers, the medium, or the heavies, and then there was some that would even only ever walk. So every lot of horses, every second day, would at least work on the walker, and they would all do some trotting and things like that. But it is important to be able to get those horses toned and work them, and plus it helps them get out of the head. So basically, coming into the last few weeks, you've got plenty of parades on. It's busy, so it's sort of a real pressure time. It's a pressure cooker time, and you've got to have the horses really peaking to perfection. And that's where it comes down to the whole team being part of the group and getting the horses right, from the grooming, the parade practice, parading, the farriers, the vets, everyone working together. And it's a very important part. The last week, hopefully you get a break from everyone, because normally you're shoeing, you're doing mains, doing ears and things like that. So it's good to have, if you can, a bit of a break before you go into the sales, and actually give the horses a little bit more time out in the yards and just relax in. I normally start dropping the grain off a few days out from heading off in transport. So that's sort of, in a way, a bit of an insight into what I do with prep. This horse here was a yearling we got 1.1 million. He's by not a single doubt. He's called Doubtland now. He's very talented horse, trained by John Hawkes. In my opinion, that was the perfect horse in shape and condition that I was always trying to prep. I preferred him fit and athletic and not too heavy. And to me, that's near the perfect horse. So appreciate everyone taking the time to listen. There's probably plenty of things I missed, but I think Peter's talk was fantastic, and thank you for the opportunity of doing this.
Steve, the presentation was absolutely phenomenal. I personally learned a lot from it, and I think you've offered some very interesting insights there. For everyone watching, if you want to stay up to date with Steve, you can have a look at his website, so www.stephenerwin.com.au, or give him a follow on Twitter at StephenIrwin69 there. So thank you so much, Steve. Really, really appreciate it. Now, before we go to questions, we do have some there. I am going to introduce, so as I did say, we've formed a partnership with KER and Barastoc. So just to give a bit of background about Barastoc as well, before I introduce Andrew. Barastoc is one of Australia's leading horse feed companies, producing feed for the sport and leisure market, the racing and spelling sector, as well as the breeding sector. Barastoc feeds are critically reviewed and tailored to suit the local environment, including understanding each farm's unique pasture profile. Barastoc are a team of passionate horse people backed by decades of hands-on experience. They all love their horses, and they see each horse as an individual. As the partner for Kentucky Equine Research, they can help ensure each mare is in her best condition, each foal gets the best possible start in life, and your yearlings reach their full potential, and your mares are cared for and ready for their next cycle. So helping us answer some of the questions tonight, as you waved to us earlier, is Andrew Soper. So Andrew is a key account manager at Barastoc. Andrew grew up on the Western District of Victoria on a sheep, cattle and cropping farm. Horses were part of his day-to-day life from a very young age. Andrew is part of the Barastoc Specialised Equine team and brings many years of hands-on experience and technical expertise in both the domestic market and the international market. So thank you for joining us as well, Andrew, and helping us answer some questions. So we've got a few coming in here. Now, they're not directed at anyone, so I'll let whoever wants to take over. From Anonymous, what's your optimum length of yearling preparation? Whoever would like to take the floor, maybe Sarah.
I think 10 to 12 weeks is perfect.
Everyone's nodding in agreement there, so that seems to be the... Sorry, Steve?
Sorry. Yeah, the reason is 10 to 12 weeks, normally just at 10 weeks are coming spot on, and it just gives you a couple of weeks up your sleeve if there's any little issues and things like that. And especially for Magic Million sales, you normally got bleached coats, so you it just does help bring the horses on a little bit better, I find, and they're a little bit more immature compared to the Easter horses. So.
Perfect. From Karen, do you think body work is important during the prep?
Oh, definitely.
Whoever would like
definitely.
To
I definitely think body work is, and look, a lot of the times also putting rollers on horses and things like that is very important to help condition them and get the right muscle tone.
Thank you, Steve. I've got another question here for Steve. What was the base grain mix you used, partnered with which KER feeds? And then there's a few more. Did you use an oil? If so, which one? So we might have to break these down because there's a few coming in. And favourite type of rug, jute, cotton, etc. So we might answer one at a time. So we'll start with, what was the base grain mix you used, partnered with the KER feeds?
I would use the Barastoc Prepare was the base feed, and then also we'd add barley and barley Equijewel, oat and loosened chaff, a soybean meal, oil, plus the Equishore, Restore, BioBloom, all of those type of things were put into the feed. So that was the base feed. Plus, basically, is a minimum 2 biscuits of hay per day.
And use command.
Perfect. And then
use command for some horses you didn't want the oats in. So yeah.
And we'd also use cool.
So then we have, did you use an oil? If so, which one?
Linseed. Yep.
Charmaine's frozen.
Frozen.
Charmaine's frozen again.
Ignore me.
Yeah.
And Steve, favourite type of rug, jute, cotton, etc.
We would normally use the cotton, and then we'd have a jute over the top.
Perfect. Now we have another question here. The question is about putting yearlings under light to help keep coats for the later sales. Who would like to take that?
Andrew would be good.
I get to have a chat. There you go. Yeah, so it's probably not something you need for the earlier sales, but similar to the mares, when you're trying to get the mares to cycle earlier for the season, particularly down here in Victoria. But the latest sales down here in Victoria, it's something that a few of the farmers do actually miss, to keep that extended daylight to stop them getting that bit of thicker, longer coat going into the sales, where you want to have that good glossy coat. So it's worth the investment to put the lights in. You can keep them rugged, but to extend that daylight is certainly beneficial to help keep that hair coat in good condition leading into the sales.
Thank you, Andrew. And don't go too far, because I have another question for you. The question is, colts do more exercise than fillies when turned out. So do we adjust the feed accordingly?
Yeah, I think we covered it a bit earlier too, in the body condition of the fillies. They generally don't muck around and play and move around as much. There's actually a guy that I spoke to a few years ago at a farm that they actually put pedometers on the colts and the fillies of a night, and the colts were doing up to 3 times more exercise than the fillies, which was quite an interesting bit of information to come back. But generally, if you watch the colts out, when you go to an arrowfield and they're all turned out in their individual paddocks or yards, the colts are generally, more active, run around, play, buck, rear and stuff, where the fillies will be a lot more settled and just keep munching away on whatever feed's provided. So, if you're looking at your colts and your fillies and the colts aren't doing as well, then maybe they don't need quite as much exercise, and the fillies might need to step it up just a little bit to get your draft looking even.
Interesting fact there, and interesting little exercise with the pedometers too. Now we have another question. At what stage of the preparation do you fit shoes?
Yeah, basically they get shod basically first week they come in, so they'll be shod 3 times for the whole prep. So they'll be shod, first week they come in, then in 4 weeks' time, and then final shoeing. If we can stretch it out to 5, it'll be perfect.
I was just checking there to see, thank you, Steve, that's phenomenal. I was just checking there to see if we had any questions on our socials, and we don't at the minute. Does anyone else have any questions at the minute? I think all of the talks were very comprehensive, but does anyone have anything they would like to ask our panelists now while they have them before we go for the night? Because this is your time, Peter, Andrew and Steve, and obviously they have a wealth of knowledge between all 3 of them.
I was going to ask Andrew about different forms of exercise, and you go to a few farms and you see, people who exercise differently. What do you reckon's the optimal exercise regime?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We see different disciplines, I suppose, as well, do things differently. There's no fixed way to do it. Hand walking is terrific because you get more handling and the horses are more settled. So when you get to the sales, they generally parade better because they've had more time spent with them. Walkers are great to give them a little turnout, but the bigger the circumference of the walker, the better, because there's not as much twisting and turning on the joints as well. So, they're all things to take into consideration. I've had some farms, I see them work them off the side of a quad bike up and down laneways at a good long trot as well. I've got farms that, if they're a bit weaker behind, will actually do exercises of backing them up the length of the barn a time or 2 a week to help develop that back end, look a bit stronger going to the sale. So it's sort of something that, when we go to the farms, we see, lots of different horses, and you try and, enhance each horse where you can with feed and exercise. So that's something that, I get asked to visit farms, every 2 to 3 weeks to also assist, with an outside view of the horses and how they're tracking, and to try and assist the farmer getting their draft, looking as spot on as they possibly can going into the sale.
And I'll ask Steve another exercise-related question. How long do you think a roller needs to be on a horse, Steve, to have a positive effect?
I think at least three weeks you'll start seeing the effect. At least 3.
We do have 2 more questions here. So first question is, what's the ideal size for yearling day paddocks in your opinions?
In the end, I think it depends on the size of your farm, but a minimum of 40 metres by sort of 25 is minimum. But, I don't think too big. I prefer, some people have very big runs, but you do get worried that they get up too much speed and can try and take the fence on when they're fresh and getting fit. So I prefer a little bit smaller and ones that are close enough to the other horse so they can compete up and down against the fence against each other is great.
Andrew, Peter, did you want to add to that, or?
Oh, you've got to make do with what facilities you have. You know, it's like Steve said, you don't want it too big to where they're getting too much pace up either. So, you know, some if, you know, and I think that's the thing, not too big, but, you know, you don't want to go and turn them out in a 10-acre paddock and then go clip them up and bring them in and find that they've knocked themselves and got themselves a splint or something like that as well. So, yeah, keep it as tidy as you can, but give them some space to have a bit of play to keep them sane.
Yeah, I think the mental health side of it is there seems to be some more farms these days who don't have turnout paddocks, and I think that's detrimental to the mental health of their yearlings.
Totally agree there, Peter. I can't believe some farms actually don't turn their yearlings out. It's very surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's kind of almost like everyone in isolation, isn't it? Especially when they're young. Now, we have two more here. At what point in changes on a blood panel and or physical condition would hemobuild be initiated?
Pete?
Well, I think it would be more if you've got a coat issue, you know, bleached, faded, you know, washed out coats. I think that really helps. If you've got something that's not eating well, then you might be looking to add it then. The B vitamins squirting into the mouth, that can often help boost appetite in that circumstance. But there are probably other things that you would do there, you know, I think it's less likely when you were taking bloods. But they'd be the two circumstances. I think it's got a place. Steve probably has other times he's used it. So.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, we did have one question which was there, what's the best type of fencing to use for young horses? So, Steve, this is definitely your domain. So I might let you take this one.
I definitely think horse rail fencing I've used on my own farms, and I just found it absolutely fantastic. It's basically like, it's a plastic rail up to 6 inches wide, and it's like putting me in a boxing ring. If they hit the fencing anywhere, it just sort of springs off, and the whole fence line takes the impact, not just one area. So it's definitely the safest fencing I've ever used for horses.
It is very nice fencing the horse rail. You do see a lot of farms using it these days.
Plug for Ben Duncan.
Oh, I know, but he won't do anything for me.
I create horse rail at my place too, and yeah, it is terrific.
Yep.
And safety is really important, you know, once you bring them in for a prep, because you know, you're getting close to the sale and you've got costs mounting up, and you don't want to have them getting an injury. It doesn't take much of an injury to rule them out. So having them in a safe environment there is really important. And Steve, I'll ask you a question. If you're building stables, and you build stables for people, and you're doing yearling boxes, what size would you make them?
The ones actually that we built at Arrowfield are 5 metres by 4, and I think they're absolutely perfect. We had rubber up to 1,500 high, and they were as good a box as I've ever had. Absolutely fantastic size. Just not too big, but not too small. And
in the breezeway, what do you have on the floor in the breezeways?
Yeah, we had a rubber on the floor. It was fantastic. It was from Victoria. It got fantastic grip on it, and it was, yeah. Look, it's not cheap, but it's worthwhile. In the end, for what horses are worth, you just definitely need to do as much as you can to be as safe as you can.
Yeah.
And it definitely is all about safety, isn't it? And getting these horses looking tip-top to the sale.
And the other one's ventilation in the stables too, because you're worried about their throats. You're worried about them, you know, reacting to dust and getting pharyngitis and things like that, inflammatory airway disease. So having enough ventilation in the stables is really important, particularly as most preps done over summer, and you know, they're often got more rugs on than they would normally need otherwise. So.
We have another question here now. if you had unlimited space and unlimited staff, would you ever prep completely from the paddock? Gentlemen, I'll let you take the floor.
No. You can't, to me, you can't get them as good as you can in a stable. I think they need to be boxed to get the coats and condition right. That's my opinion anyway.
I think if the other problem of prepping from the paddock is what happens when you go to the sales. Suddenly they're in a box for the first time. There's a different environment and they're in a box. If it was all online sales, I know there's somebody prepped weanlings this year for an online, from the paddock and did a good job. But the standard of weanling prepping's not the same as the standards you expect for yearling prepping. So I don't think it's possible. But I think, too many yearlings spend too much time in a box. So and they need to be getting out more.
I think too, like on that whole note, preparing yearlings going to the sales, you want to emulate as much at home as you possibly can to what they're going to see at the sales. So like Steve said earlier, once a day they parade the yearlings, they get used to people walking around them, they get used to going backwards and forwards. It's a routine for them. So when they do go to the sales, that they're quite comfortable, they know what they're doing. So everything you can emulate at home that's going to be similar to what you're going to encounter at the sales. It's very hard to, get kids in strollers and stuff wandering around them. They're not quite ever used to that. But, the more you can do at home, if you can't afford stables or you're not at that point yet with setting up your facilities, there's some really good farms that do yearling prep that'll take your yearlings on or weanlings and prepare them, take them to the sales and take that headache away for you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And finally, just before we wrap up, we have what bedding would you recommend in boxes from Anonymous as well?
Look, I think the most user-friendly that most people use is sawdust. I think straw is the ultimate bedding, but it's just too hard to get these days. And so sawdust is probably the next best. And look, there's other different bedding products out there, but sawdust seems to be the one most people use.
Okay, I think Peter or Andrew, did you want to add to that, or are you happy with the answer?
You do get the odd horse that reacts, gets skin reactions to them sometimes, which is worth thinking about. Yearling prep's a time when you can get some skin lumps and bumps, and one of the useful tools in the armory is pretty granules for getting those things down.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time tonight. All three of you have a wealth of knowledge. I think I've said that 2 or 3 times already, but it is great listening to you all because you just have such a wealth between you. Peter, thank you very much as well for all of you, Peter, Andrew and Steve, for taking the time and, obviously partnering with us, but then, helping put these webinars on. As I said before, I'm really big on education, and the more information we can provide people, the better. So I hope everyone that is watching today has been able to take some great insights away in terms of yearling prep and nutrition. This is recorded and it's obviously on our Facebook page, so it should be up there already by the time we say goodbye. So if you do have any questions or want to go back, you can, and obviously everyone's contact details have been made available tonight. So if you want to get in touch, please do with any of the speakers. Once again, thank you so much, gentlemen. I truly appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone has gotten some great insights from tonight.
Thanks, Charmaine. Thanks to Steve too for joining in. That's fantastic.
Yes.
With his experience and knowledge within the industry, that's prepared to share. And there's a lot of up and coming people could learn a lot from people like that. So thanks,
Definitely,
Steve.
an absolute spont. Yeah. All right, everyone. Have a lovely night, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night.
Yes. Thanks very much.